Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Dakota. The main structure of the narcissist is the grandiose sense of self, the omnipotent sense of self. So naturally, they're going to take this into their relationships. Two, when they could fulfill this grandiose, omnipotent sense of self, the relationship is actually quite blissful and things can move along quite magically in their mind. So as long as there's a union between the omnipotent sense of self and the omnipotent other, that's the partner who's able to provide the narcissist with all the narcissistic gratification and supplies that you all know about. Everything goes along quite well until they enter the stage of what's known as the devaluing, right? So they move from the sort of blissful relationship where everything is fine and magical. There's this union between the two of them, and then it shifts and it goes into this devaluing state, right? Or stage of the relationship. Now, the social media content suggested that this shift, like that which accounts for this shift, is that they get bored with the narcissistic supplies. Oftentimes it goes unnoticed because it's so subtle, but that there's a separation in this blissful union that then brings about the devaluation. Why the devaluation? Because the devaluation then again supports the most important thing to the narcissist, the grandiose, omnipotent sense of self. Because if he or she is able to devalue their partner, devalue you, naturally that begins to elevate. By the way, what we noticed is these subtle separations lead this narcissistic individual to become more aware of a state of dependency. In other words, they begin to depend on us. How do we begin to treat somebody like this? Or stated more appropriately, how do you get close to somebody like this in your life? A fellow was working on some home improvements and he gets stuck. He doesn't know how to progress with the home project, and he begins to get frustrated. And he turns to his wife with some level of frustration, and after giving it some thought, his wife makes a suggestion. And it was at that point that he flew into a rage. He began to devalue her, and it spiraled into a big fight. He told her, "You're useless, stick with what you don't know what you're talking about." And obviously he was quite provocative and devaluing. So in terms of the tools that I find helpful, the first order of business is always, when I hear stuff like this, whenever somebody is critical, judging, escalated, they're, in my mind, what I would consider deregulated. So the first order of business is always to help them get into a more regulated state of mind, a calm state of mind. And one way to do this is to begin to express curiosity. In other words, you want to hear what was going on internally from their perspective. And this is what I've called, and you may have heard this before, appreciate the subjectively useful component of a maladaptive symptom, right? So what he did, the way he responded, on the surface at least, to all of us seems a little bit crazy. It's maladaptive. But the first order of business is always to appreciate the subjectively useful component. Hear it from his or her perspective so that you can begin to get closer to it. The primary goal of the narcissist is the omnipotent narcissistic object relationship. I'm reminding you of this because this is where we can begin to pull on some theory so that it guides our technique. In other words, it guides the way that we talk or we relate to people like this who are close to us. What's the most important thing is this way of relating. And this way of relating suggests what? That there must be this close attunement, this union, right? This blissful union between the two. And there could be no level of separateness, right? There's no level of separation. So how does that apply to this clinical example that I'm giving you? How can we use that? We could see in this example that there is now a moment when his wife gives him a suggestion that the supplies, the admiration, the attention, the affirmations, they end, right? And she begins to assert an opinion which is different than what was in his mind. So this forces a level of separation that is intolerable in this type of relationship. So he's not receiving the constant attention, supplies. It forces a separation, and he becomes frustrated, right? But we can say more accurately, this is the more accurate way to say it, is that he feels like he's under attack. You might remember, there's no such thing as an absent caregiver. There's only a hurtful or a bad caregiver. In other words, what that means is, in the child's mind, they begin to understand that the caregiver is not just withholding something. They're not just absent. They're not just unempathic, but they're punishing them. They're purposefully, again, in the child's mind, persecuting them. And this is the stuff that gets carried forward, of course, into adulthood if it doesn't get worked through properly. So now we could see he's under attack. Again, that's the subjective experience, of course. His wife is just giving a suggestion. But to him, it feels like he's under attack, and he really believes he's under attack. So what does he need to do? If you're under attack and you're feeling devalued, worthless, put down, one line of defense is to do what? Get aggressive, counterattack. And again, I'm not saying that we agree or that we don't condone this kind of behavior, but we can begin to appreciate how one could feel this way, given his childhood history. So now that we could agree and we could see how he might feel this way, we could begin to talk to him about his behavior. But now we're doing it from the inside, from his perspective. And that makes a big difference, because oftentimes when you get them into a regulated state of mind, you're expressing curiosity, they're beginning to calm down. And you need to do this first, because when in a regulated state of mind, they could begin to reflect and perhaps even feel a little bit understood. So now this lays the groundwork for me or you to be able to talk to someone about how you can understand how they would attack. Like I could see them, I can understand now how you would attack your wife. You see, but one thing that's critical here is I'm not just expressing an understanding, but I'm also, it's like scaffolding. I'm building on something, right? Because this is all part of the strategies or the techniques. What am I building on? Now I just was able to label his behavior as attacking, as aggressive, right? And then with this, we begin to see and we can become curious. Now, the curiosity, which I always recommend as a first level intervention or strategy, the curiosity is to help him or her get closer to their own experience. I'm always curious in raising questions, not just to get answers, but to help them get a little closer to their own inner experiences of what's going on. In other words, what's going on inside of it that led them to react in this way. And this stuff gets very complicated, by the way, because personality disorders are quite complicated. It's never just one thing or another. As you could probably sense, this individual is beginning to get into more real, if I could call them real issues, or painful emotions. And with this, you may be asked, is this what leads to change? And the answer to that is maybe, or it's possible, or it depends. You see, because change or progress with these individuals is never linear. It doesn't go straight up. In other words, you may be talking to a loved one and feel like you have a real genuine moment with them and you're getting some. And then the next day or a couple days later, the whole cycle begins again and they begin to devalue you and they take that omnipotent position. Because remember, the omnipotent narcissistic object way of relating is the most important thing to these individuals. But the good news is we have strategies and techniques to deal with this as well. If you're interested in hearing more about that, tune in for my next video on the Narcissism Decoder. Until next time.